she turned all of it away and submitted to the will of Allah. Her kingdom worshipped the sun, and she brought them into worship of Allah out of her love for Solomon alayhi salam and his teachings. Suleiman commanded the jinn, and it was granted by Allah and revealed that Allah would punish those jinn who rebelled against his prophet. The great temple in Jerusalem was constructed by the jinn, as was Suleiman's palace. The massive statues, the incredible use of glass and metals was unheard of in his time. The great temple's architecture surpassed that of anything that Egypt or Greece had achieved, and many of the secrets of its construction were lost when the Romans destroyed it almost 2,000 years ago. The temple of Solomon alayhi salam was constructed on the very spot where Jacob, also called Israel or Yaqub alayhi salam, saw the ladder ascending to heaven. Later, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would ascend from that point into the heavens during Al-Miraj, and currently the Dome of the Rock is constructed on that point. In Islam, we reject the corrupted biblical account that says Suleiman alayhi salam brought pagan idols into the temple. This was written in spite for the great prophet because of his love and marriage to the Queen of Sheba, since she had come from a pagan tradition and was not an Israelite. What remains of the prophet Suleiman's great wisdom can partially be found in the book of Proverbs in the Bible. Though some has been distorted or altered over time, his love for the Queen of Sheba and other wives can be seen in the Song of Solomon. I have to say, this was originally intended as a private love letter between spouses, so it can get a little spicy in places. Now, the final miracle of Suleiman alayhi salam is in his death. The Prophet Solomon alayhi salam was deep in prayer and leaning on his walking stick while he died. Now, the jinn who had been put in service were bound by Allah to serve him until death. So they were always watching in these days to see when he would die. Hours upon hours, Suleiman alayhi salam stood leaned against his stick until Allah sent a small worm to chew through the wood. Then finally his body fell, and the jinn realized that they did not know all that was. The jinn who had still been rebellious in heart then submitted to Allah because they had been shown that even a small worm of the earth was told something that they did not know, which humbled them greatly. Elijah and Elisha alayhi salam were prophets in the lineage of Aaron. Some say that they were brothers, others that they were cousins, and there are a few that say Elisha merely learned from Elijah. Much of what is known from these two prophets is not in the Qur'an, but must be looked at through the Bible and other religious texts. The king of Israel at this time was named Ahab, and his queen Jezebel had brought the worship of a pagan god named Baal into Israel. It was because of this that Elijah was sent, and he argued with the king and warned him to turn to the worship of Allah or suffer the consequences. It is revealed in Jewish texts that Ahab and Jezebel had killed the prophets which came before Elijah, and they had become evil and corrupt. After Elijah challenged Ahab and Jezebel, Allah sent him into hiding in the wilderness to protect and teach him. While in the wilderness, Elijah was fed by ravens. And then when the creek dried up, Allah sent him to a poor widow who had a son. The widow was blessed by Allah, and Elijah told her not to fear feeding strangers, because Allah would never allow her oil or flour to be consumed. So, she fed Elijah, and Allah caused her flour and oil supply to always remain full. During the continued drought, the widow's son died, and Elijah alayhi salam prayed to allow the child to come back to life, and Allah granted his prayer. The pagan god Baal is supposed to be a god of fire and rain and weather. So when Elijah returned after the drought, he challenged Ahab again to return to the worship of Allah. When Ahab and Jezebel again refuse and mock Elijah and the people demand proof of Allah, Elijah set up a challenge. He and the priests of Baal built identical altars on the mountain. They piled wood and a sacrifice sheep on the altar. The agreement is made that the God who was real would take the sacrifice. So the priests of Baal chanted and danced and called for Baal for hours upon hours, while Elijah alayhi salam ridiculed their efforts. The priests then added their own blood to the sacrifice and again chanted. And Elijah was saying, maybe you should shout louder. Maybe he's in the shower or something. He was really mocking them through this whole thing. So then, after they finally were just tired and collapsed from exhaustion, Elijah alayhi salam ordered 12 barrels of water to be poured on his altar. Then he stretched out his hands and submitted the offering to Allah. And at that moment, a pillar of fire came out of the sky and consumed the sacrifice, the wood, and the altar whole. The people who witnessed this immediately fell in worship of Allah. Later, Elijah alayhi salam retreats into the wilderness again, where he is joined by Elisha, and they are both instructed in the prophecy of Allah. They both called people to the worship of Allah and retrained the Israelites in the law of Allah. Elijah brought many people of Israel back to Allah, and when his time came to an end, he walked with Elisha to a place where the river flowed. Elisha alayhi salam then struck the river with his staff, and it became dry. Then a chariot of fire came down from the sky and carried Elijah to heaven. Elisha alayhi salam was left to finish the task of dealing with Jezebel and Ahab. And Jezebel's end came exactly as Elijah had prophesied. Elijah alayhi salam had come with a peaceful message and warnings, and he prophesied the coming of the one who would ruin the pagan rule of Israel. Elisha alayhi salam fulfilled that prophecy by working among the leaders of the land, giving them chances to return to Allah, and then when they refused or mocked or threatened Elisha, then Allah would turn the creatures of the earth against them. In some incidents, birds would descend upon a wicked ruler. Others, bears would come and slaughter the evil people. Elisha alayhi salam did not lay one hand on anyone, but the hand of Allah guided the creatures of the earth to cleanse the evil people from Israel.